The following presentation is brought to you by the Realm Network.
Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to screenwriter, producer, and UCLA film professor Neil Landau, author of the TV Showrunners Roadmap. Stick around. Neil's TV credits include, wait for it, Doogie Howser, MD. That's right, he was present for Neil Patrick Harris's passage into legendary. So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview, brought to you by Amazon.com, Audible.com, and 1-800-DIAL-DJs. Please stop by the website, MrMedia.com, click on our advertisers, support the show. And remember, there's more than 1,000 interviews available at MrMedia.com. We've been doing this since February 2007. Hope you'll find something you like. And thanks for listening. Mr. Media is recorded live before a full audience of first ADs who know they're smarter than every showrunner they've ever worked with in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. I did sort of wonder if there's enough of an audience to justify a conversation about what it takes to be a great TV showrunner. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that pop culture has turned modern showrunners into rock stars. Because even if you're not sure what a showrunner is, you'll know a large number of them by name. Vince Gilligan, creator of Breaking Bad. Matthew Weiner, whatever you like to call yourself, Matthew, creator of Mad Men. Stephen Moffat, creator of Sherlock and modern-day savior of Doctor Who. Shonda Rhimes, creator of Grey's Anatomy and Scandal. And Dan Harmon, creator of Community. Those are probably the best known showrunners in television, but if you have other favorite TV shows, you probably know who the heart and soul of those productions is, thanks to everything from Entertainment Weekly and the showrunner's likely participation in Twitter, I almost said Twitter, in Twitter and Facebook. Now, to quote Neil Landau's introduction to the TV showrunner's roadmap, quote, in movies, the director is king. In the television series business, the showrunner calls the shots. A showrunner is almost always the head writer and executive producer of a TV series. And very often, but not always, the showrunner is also the creator of the series. So that should explain that. And once you know what a showrunner does, you probably think, oh, I could do that. Well, you're wrong, but what the hell? Who am I to puncture your dreams? Because I certainly daydream about doing it too. Now, in his book, the man who teaches screenwriting and producing at the UCLA School of Film shares his in-depth conversations with the showrunners behind Breaking Bad, Homeland, Scandal, Modern Family, Once Upon a Time, Lost, House MD, Friday Night Lights, and the showrunner meat grinder, The Walking Dead. Even if you don't imagine yourself creating a TV show and guiding it through 7 seasons on a broadcaster cable network, you'll find his behind-the-scenes conversations to be irresistible and fascinating. And Landau doesn't just talk out his ass about showrunning. His TV credits include Doogie Howser, MD, Melrose Place, The Magnificent Seven, The Secret World of Alex Mack, and MTV's Undressed. He also wrote the film comedy Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. And Neil Landau, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Good to have you here. Glad we amused you along the path.
Yes, you did.
Neil, there have always been showrunners in concept. Maybe we didn't use that name so much, but I'm wondering, is it just this generation that has been elevated by the industry and pop culture, or was that going on before? I just don't recall it.
I think it's been going on before. It's just there somehow the term was coined probably 20 years ago. It started to th- there were many executive producers on a show and on a in TV. Most of the executive producers are very high level writers on the writing staff, and one person in general needs to sort of lead, and um, if the showrunner is also the head writer of the show, which is very, very common because most of the showrunners have wrote the pilot and, they have a lot of experience as writers. As the showrunner, in addition to having responsibilities of being the head writer, the showrunner also has to be extremely involved in helming production and can't always be in the writer's room. So, you could have a show where or there usually is, uh, let's say on a staff of 6 or 8 people, there's four very high level executive producer level writers, but only one of them runs the writing room, has to step out of the writer's room frequently to go to casting, to go to set, to go to editing. They have a million other responsibilities. And so that person kind of takes lead and captain is the captain of the whole ship. And I think it's possible that maybe in the past, the writers stayed in the writers' room, and there were producers kind of doing a lot of those other things. And I think the head writers started to often in the past see a lot of the stuff in the writers' room not being translated to fit the vision that he or she had for the show. And so they wanted to expand their influence. And little by little, it was like, well, I want to control more than just the pages. I want to control production. I want to control casting. And so that person sort of became the ringleader of everything. And that person became the showrunner. And for people who are either crossing over from film into television or for high level writer executive producers from other shows, as they may have seen the show's quality or their vision of the show become compromised, they started to say, I want more control, more control. I want to be like the director of the whole thing. And that's kind of how it happened. The writers actually this is so rare in Hollywood, in the history of Hollywood, but it's one of the rare instances where writers have become more powerful in the medium of television over the years.
Is some of it, did some of the focus on a showrunner happen as a result of kind of credit inflation, where writers are now executive producers? I mean, they're lead actors who are with the series for several years, and they become executive producers. Is calling someone the showrunner, does it have something to do with distinguishing them from a show that has 12 producers, for example? Or?
Yeah. Well, if the show is successful and critically beloved and highly rated, that person's going to get all the credit. Conversely, if the show tanks or disappoints, the captain's going to go down with the ship. So it's a huge amount of responsibility. Every showrunner I've ever known, I mean, they work 14, 16 hours a day. They work weekends. They don't sleep. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult job. And so it's not that everybody wants to be a showrunner. There are a lot. I've always been happier being in the number 2 position as opposed to the top position because, do you really want all of that responsibility on you, only resting on your shoulders? It takes a real, person with a very thick skin, somebody who's able to multitask, delegate extremely well, and can handle the pressure. It's an enormous amount of pressure.
Now, if I was to surf over to IMDb, sorry, IMDb, would I find showrunner as a listed credit?
No.
I don't think so, right? So how is that not caught up? Why is that not?
Well, because the Writers Guild it dictates basically credits, and it's not in the Writers Guild, minimum basic agreement, which is sort of the agreement they have with the studios and the networks in terms of pay scales. And it's one of the credit arbitration. It's what our union, the Writers Guild, does. and it's just not. It's more of a slang kind of it's an insider. It's insider speak, but in terms of credits, um, it's known more inside the show and probably now in the press when the show's being promoted than it is as like an officially recognized title or credit.
I'm trying to think of the earliest showrunner I could maybe identify. I'm thinking like Carl Reiner, the Dick Van Dyke Show. Would that be
Yeah,
appropriate?
yeah, no, or Norman Lear,
Okay, Norman Lear, right? Um,
Gary Marshall, some of those kinds of shows. But Norman Lear, I think of. I know there were people before him, but Norman Lear, I just think of as sort of like the granddaddy of showrunners in a way, because he was a pioneer, and he was somebody who I was just reading an article about him in the New York Times, I think it was this past weekend, and he's one of the first people who really took the network to task, because All in the Family really frightened everybody. It was so cutting edge and so controversial, and he just really stood his ground. I think they shot two different pilots, and it was a real uphill battle for him, and he just really fought for what he believed. And I think for me, after Norman Lear, because he had a lot of different shows, the next person who sort of really was a pioneer in terms of how not only just the trends and the style of a crime procedural show was done, but also kind of really just taking that. It was beyond just being the head writer, really just kind of becoming an impresario and reinventing the wheel in a lot of ways, was Stephen Bochco with Hill Street Blues. It was a really different kind of show. It was darker, grittier, handheld camera. You felt like you were right there, and that was also a real groundbreaking show. So Norman Lear for comedy, Stephen Bochco, I would say, for drama, are the ones that sort of became the first, real recognizable showrunners in their medium.
Well, and I'm thinking we knew Carl Reiner with the Dick Van Dyke Show because he played Alan. I can't think of Alan's last name.
Alan Brady.
Alan Brady, thank you, the host of the TV show. Alan Brady, of course, the grandfather of the Brady Bunch. No, just kidding. But more recently, we're seeing showrunners step out in a different way. Dan Harmon has a podcast called Harmon Town, in which he has members of his cast from Community come on as guests. He'll have other showrunners such as Mitch Horowitz, from Arrested Development, and then also I think this may be the most extreme. Vince Gilligan, one of the first things he did when Breaking Bad ended, he went on Community and played and was an actor on Community. I mean, that's not something we would have expected from showrunners a generation ago.
Well, I think the television writer, executive producers became smart, and they saw that movie directors like Quentin Tarantino and Steven Soderbergh and Martin Scorsese, that having their names, having their brand and their name become almost like household names, they were able to almost have their own relationship with their fans, with the audience, and people would go see their movies not just because of this movie star who was in it, but because it was directed by them, or in some cases written and directed by them. So the TV showrunner people have kind of realized that they can have a direct relationship with the fans of their shows, and it insulates them a lot from the politics and the network interference. It's a little bit like when the president of the United States is kind of having a battle with Congress, like every day, but where he goes and appeals directly to the American people. It's like, I'm going to talk to you directly. So this has been going on for many years, but one of the things that I observed from all the interviews I did with the showrunners is that, sorry, somebody's, is that
Neil Landau on a cast of thousands.
Yes, exactly. Staff. Sorry, if you're watching this and wondering what room I'm in sort of a all-purpose utility room right now because we're renovating a part of our house. But anyway, where was I?
I was waiting for you to ask me that.
It's gone. I'm usually good at coming back to my thoughts.
That's all right.
One of the things that I observed is showrunners now have they're very into social media. They're looking at the message boards for their show. Shonda Rhimes is a big tweeter. And so they have a direct relationship with their fans. People know who they are. Um, and I think that also speaks a lot to the celebrity showrunner. Gives the showrunner, yes, a higher profile, and maybe they'll be recognized in public, but it also gives them uh, more power in a way to become their own brand.
Hmm.
And because we've seen in some cases, like with The Walking Dead, Frank Darabont, the brilliant screenwriter director who did Shawshank and Green Mile, he, after The Walking Dead aired and was successful, he got actually you know booted off his own show by AMC. And I think probably the reason for it was just that he wanted the quality to be like a movie every week, and they were going, we don't have the money, we don't have the time, this has to be sort of something that can be producible on a TV production schedule. So he left. But in other cases, like with Dan Harmon on Community, when he kind of tangled with the network and lost, because he had such a strong direct relationship with the public, he ended up coming back and winning that battle. And I don't think that would have happened if he was just an anonymous guy.
Plus, him coming back proved that the show had lost its way
Yes,
without him, and
yes.
it's people who may not watch that show. It's crazy funny this season, and probably what they had expected to be its swan song season. And they'll probably get another year out of it at least because they just found the funny again. So
Well, and look at Matthew Weiner with the Mad Men negotiations. He was saying, I'm not coming back. And, it was a big, dirty contract dispute. But if he had left, who knows? I mean, it's possible I think the quality would have dropped a lot, just because I think he's the vision of the show. But also, if the quality really dropped, everybody would know why, because they know him, and they know it's his show. Um, so I think having public relations as a showrunner really helps the showrunners' cachet and power just in getting the show on that they want on.
so not an overstatement to say that some of these men and women have become rock stars in their own right.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you go to Comic-Con and you see the hundreds of thousands of people, and everybody knows who these people are. I mean, Damon Lindelof is another one, and Carlton Cuse. They did Lost. And J.J. Abrams, of course, is like a huge, huge name. Everybody knows his brand in movies and television.
Joss
And
Whedon.
yes, Joss Whedon, absolutely, with Buffy. And so, as they become more brands of the, it's not just that the show is a brand or that the network is a brand, but the creator is the brand. And it's, as a writer, I love it. I think it's a great thing for writers to have that kind of power that we for so many years didn't have.
Tell me, Neil, about some of your favorite moments from the Q&As that you conducted with showrunners for the book. Who, for example, surprised you the most when you met them?
Well, one thing I can say is they were all extremely generous with their time and no ego. Shonda Rhimes, that surprised me because when I started to ask, she's hugely successful, and I think Grey's Anatomy is going into its 12th season, and Scandal is like, just on the edge, the zeitgeist now. It's just she's done it again, and she just has another show coming now. She was just, I said to her, can we talk about your process? And she was a little bit like, well, she was a little superstitious almost to say, I don't know, like if I start to think about it too much and analyze it too much, maybe I won't be able to do it anymore. Maybe I'll become self-conscious about it. She also, she's really a visionary in terms of, she'll come into a writer's room at the beginning of the season, and on her shows, because they're network shows, she's doing 22 episodes. She'll come in at the beginning of the season of Scandal, let's say, and she'll sit down with her writers and say, "All right, this is what we're doing. These are the arcs for the full season. This is how it starts. This is where we're going," and that's rare. Matthew Weiner has talked about how he only likes to arc 5 episodes at a time because as they're working out those five, they're going to learn things, they're going to find moments, discover things that are going to change the course of the next seven.
Hmm.
Because they do 12. Now they have the luxury of time. They have a smaller order, so you can generally when the order is smaller, the quality goes up.
And a
I mean,
split they all seem to split seasons now too. They'll take 12 and do
yes,
5, and they'll do 6 and 6 or something like that.
they'll have a mid-season finale and then a yeah. And so but the the ease with which she's able to spin story and just sort of uh, look ahead down the road and be able to get ahead and know where everything's going to go and be able to really hit that mark, that target is, I was really just incredibly impressed with that. And she can do it on several shows at a time. So that was pretty interesting to me. Um, One of the surprising moments was when I talked to Alex Gansa, who's one of the showrunners of Homeland. He talked about how um, the way they conceived Homeland in season one, Carrie and Brody were not going to be in scenes together for quite a long time. And when they were in dailies, pretty early after they were in a scene together for the first time, he said it was like the word chemistry was flashing over Claire Danes and Damian Lewis's heads, and they realized, oh my God, we've got to get these people together and in a room sooner because this is when the show's really coming alive. And so they had written several scripts ahead, and they decided to throw them out and re-break story to bring them together sooner. And I remember when I was watching season one, I was really surprised that they did that because one of the things we say in a writer's room is are we burning through story too fast?
Hmm.
If you burn through story too fast, you can get the short-term gain, but then sometimes you can write yourself into a corner where you're like, now what do we do? We've already told all that. So it made this first season of Homeland extremely, it was extremely riveting, and yet in some ways they kind of started to tell story too quickly, in my opinion, and they wrote themselves into a corner, so they had to spoiler alert, they had to kill off one of the main characters. That's what I'll say. But anyway, so that was interesting. When I talked to Damon Lindelof about Lost, Lost was conceived by J.J. Abrams and Damon and Carlton Cuse as a 4-season show. That's all they wanted to do.
And if only it had ended after 4, even 5 seasons.
Well, what
Sorry.
they did was because the show, I know, I mean, a lot of people feel that way. And I think, Damon was extremely diplomatic. Like I couldn't get him to say anything negative about
Carlton,
anything.
he wanted to blame Carlton, right? And Carlton, if Carlton was in front of you, he'd be saying, "Well, I don't want to say anything about Damon, but
Yeah,
let me tell you where the
exactly.
mistake was made."
Well, I asked him, having done 6 seasons of Lost, with hindsight, is there anything he would have done differently? And he wasn't really willing to answer that because he didn't want to assign blame. However, what he did say was Lost was conceived as 4 seasons. They always knew the end of season 4. And when the show became such a phenomenon, ABC said, we want 6 seasons. We want more, but they said the most we could give you is 6. So what they did was they knew they couldn't change the end because that had always been planned out. So what they did was they kind of added 2 seasons in between so they could still have the same end. And I think that's where people felt in some cases that the show kind of jumped the shark, to use a Happy Days term, and so anyway, I thought that was interesting, and I wonder. I've worked on other shows where that kind of thing has happened, where you want to extend, and so you kind of add something, and sometimes that can be a positive thing, but in the case of Lost, maybe because they had to do so many, it was challenging.
I had my neighbor. I'm looking actually out the window and thinking of him. My neighbor and I walk the dogs together every night, and we're always talking about TV shows. And one night he said, "Yeah, I just started watching Lost." He said, "I'd never seen it before, so I'm gonna binge watch it, for the next over the next couple of weeks." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Great." I said, "It's a great show. Just decide that the next to the last episode in season 6 is the last episode, and you just don't ever start that final episode. Just set it aside, pretend it doesn't exist." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You will hate yourself for having spent all those hours, 120, 150 hours, whatever it is, on the show. If you watch it all the way through to the last 2 hours. I said, you'll hate yourself. He said, what do you mean? I said, I don't want to tell you. I'm
Right,
just
right.
telling you, don't watch it. I said, biggest mistake my wife and I made was to invest our time in that last episode, because up until that point it was fascinating. We were drawn to it. It was riveting, and then they just, yeah, I don't feel like they jumped the shark until the very last episode. But I said to him, go watch Lillehammer. You want to watch something special, go watch Lillehammer. Or but I feel bad for those guys, because that show, I don't want to linger too much on Lost, but that show, interestingly, it was the zeitgeist. It was the it
Mm-hmm.
show. Everyone was talking about it. The minute the show aired, the last episode aired, it fell off the map. People no longer cared. They had sold all those. They had sold the repeats, the syndication rights. Nobody cared to watch because it had such a ludicrous conclusion, and everybody knew there was no reason to go back and watch it again. Anyway, I'm sorry. I don't mean to.
Well,
You know,
season finales in general, though, or not season finales, well, that too, but series
series
finales.
finales.
David Chase got a lot of flack also for The Last Sopranos, and I'm sure Matthew Weiner's going to get some flack for the end of Mad Men, and Vince Gilligan. I felt that the Breaking Bad series finale was great, but I had some students at UCLA who were, I had one in particular who was like, I hated it. So, what I always say, and I'm sure a lot of the showrunners I talk to would agree, it doesn't necessarily matter if the audience loves it or hates it, as long as they're talking about it. There was a subplot on The Good Wife. This season, I think The Good Wife has become really, really good. I mean, they really kind of reclaimed the show and injected a lot of life back into it. But there had been a subplot where one of the characters had an abusive ex-husband, and it became extremely violent between them. I mean, they were having these full-on fistfights, between this man and this woman, just like Kill Bill kind of stuff without the... And, the audience just really hated it. They really rejected it. But for a while, it was like everybody couldn't stop talking about it and tuning in to watch it, which from a network point of view isn't necessarily a bad thing. The problem is when you just tune out and you don't care anymore. It's like in relationships, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is apathy. As long as you're sometimes still in there, there's still juice to the show, which I think could be a good thing as a business thing. In terms of other surprising moments, that I discovered in these interviews. See, I do remember sometimes.
You circled back. That was pretty good.
I circled back. Yeah. See what I did there? Vince Gilligan also was saying that Jesse Pinkman was not intended to be a major character to run through the whole show. He was supposed to be a character who was only on in season 1 and who they killed off pretty early. But again, chemistry. They just saw, which is something you can't necessarily calculate when you're just working on the page. When they saw, the chemistry between Walter and Jesse, it was like, wow, this is sort of the sweet spot of the whole show when these two are together. And it became the central relationship of the whole show, on the business side, definitely. And then, but I think the fans will remember Jesse and Walt as sort of the core of the show in a very positive way. And so, it just goes to show you can map everything out all you want, but it's a very fluid process.
You say right on the cover of the book that you have 21 navigational tips in this roadmap of yours for Showrunner. Did you have them all in place when you started the interviews? And the reason I ask you that is I wondered if any of the showrunners disputed or took issue with any of the ones you had, or if in the course of the interviews you actually discovered more.
Well, I've been teaching writing and creating the 1 hour drama series at UCLA for many years now. So I kind of had all of these touchstones that I tend to talk about in class. But this is my third book. So the second book I did was called the Screenwriters Roadmap, and I interviewed 21 A-list movie screenwriters. And the reason I'm mentioning that, besides to plug that book, is
I'll do the plugs here. Thanks, Neil.
Yeah. I decided that I was not going to write any of my text, because these books, half the text is me talking about sort of my theories and then the other half are the showrunners commenting on those specific theories. So each chapter would, I talked to Vince Gilligan. The chapter is make us care. It was basically like, who are we rooting for? And I wanted to. I hope I'm saying that one right. Make us care. Because one of the things we talk about in class is, who are we rooting for? It doesn't mean the character has to be, the most likable person in the world, but we have to be rooting for them on some level, or they have to have a sympathetic goal, which Walter did. Walter White did, certainly in the early parts of Breaking Bad. So I decided with my movie book that I wouldn't write any of my text, even though I kind of knew what I wanted to say, until after I did all 21 interviews. Because I wanted to see what I would learn and how I may want to adjust my text. And I did adjust a lot of what I wanted to say based on those interviews. So with the TV book, I did the same thing. There's 24 interviews, because for the comedy chapter, I wanted to have a few different perspectives from different types of sitcoms. And so I waited to do all the interviews. It informed sort of my perspective, and then I wrote my text and was able to integrate things. Because, for instance, I interviewed Chip Johannesson, who's one of the executive producers on Homeland, and he also was the showrunner on Dexter in season 5. And I wanted to interview him on the chapter on theme, because he wrote an episode of Homeland called Achilles' Heel, which, if you look at the A, B, and C stories of that Homeland episode, every character has a very specific weakness and vulnerability in the plot line of that episode. And Saul, the Mandy Patinkin character, he even has a line in the episode where he talks about how his wife is his Achilles heel. And so I thought, and then I remember watching a Dexter episode where the themes were just so clearly, where the A, B, and C story themes were all really linked. And I've known Chip for many years, so I thought, oh, Chip, perfect. I'm going to interview him about theme and specifically cite these episodes he wrote and how the theme sort of ran through all the storylines. And the very first thing he said was, theme is bullshit. I never think about theme. In the writers' room of Homeland, we eschew writerly conventions. So anything that feels written or overly thought out or thematically too tidy, we reject. And then I pointed out the Achilles heel episode that he wrote and said, but this is so clearly laid out, and you even have a line of dialogue about it. And he said, I know, he doesn't like that episode. And he wishes he could take that line out because he feels like it was too on the nose. And so he basically railed for like 20 minutes about how theme is bullshit and how it's pretentious and how you should, it's something he actually actively works against, which I thought was all great. I thought this is perfect for the chapter on theme, because I want people to disagree and have different points of view. Because my main message in all these books and everything that I teach is there is no formula, there is no absolute right way of doing something, because if there was, everything would be a hit and everything would work. And as we know, most shows fail, and there's a lot of experimentation, and there's a mysterious kind of X factor in things that really do work that nobody knows exactly how to start with that. A lot of times it just sort of happens. And so there's a lot of happy accidents and creative experimentation that ends up working. So anyway, about halfway through the interview, after talking about how theme was bullshit for a while, he then stopped and said, well, you know what? Wait a minute. I got to take back everything I just said. And he laughed and he said, when he was running Dexter in season 5, he was feeling like they were going over the same territory again and again, and he was not feeling really inspired, and he was trying to just find a way this new season could kind of lift off. And he said he was lying in bed, tossing and turning, as all showrunners do, because they don't sleep well. And he woke up in the middle of the night and wrote down the word atonement on a piece of paper next to his bed. And if you've seen season 5 of Dexter, it's the season with Julia Stiles, where he actually starts trying to help somebody who was victimized and wronged. So it wasn't just his own vigilante quest. He was actually trying to help a woman who was victimized by another abuser as a means to atone for not being able to prevent the murder of his wife. And it was a different MO for Dexter for that season. And it became a thematic for the whole season. And so basically Chip was saying, which I agree, I think it can be valuable to approach story with theme and to have those sort of underlying themes in mind. And certainly if you're trying to break story and figure out where the show's going next and you're in a room and there's a bunch of whiteboards that are staying white, you can throw anything at them to try to find new story. But what it also pointed to is, that he, at the end of the day, you want theme to be almost subliminal, where you don't want the audience to be identifying it and going, hey, look at that great theme that the writers threw in there. You want them just to be completely absorbed in the story and the characters. And the theme, when it works, it's subliminal, but you just finish the episode thinking that was really satisfying. That just felt transcendent in a way, more than just random events. So there was that. You want to hear one more interesting
absolutely.
thing I discovered? I don't know.
Yeah, let's hear it.
You can edit. Hart Hanson, who runs Bones, which is another show that's been on for, I think it's going into its 11th season.
Decade.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
It's been around a long time.
A long time. He's almost never in the writer's room on Bones, because he has a new show now called Backstrom with Ryan Wilson, and he is in the writer's room. But on Bones, he's not in the writer's room. His kind of number two person, Stephen Engel, is in the writer's room. Is it Stephen Engel or Stephen Nathan? But anyway, there's somebody else who's in the writer's room with the staff. They break story. They throw a lot of ideas around. Then Stephen comes down to Hart's office and pitches to him what they've done. Hart responds, gives him some direction. Stephen then goes and breaks stories. They work on beat sheets and outlines. Hart doesn't read outlines. He only reads the scripts when they come in. He does a full rewrite on every script. Sometimes it's a polish, sometimes it's a page one rewrite on every script. And I said to him, if you have to do a page one rewrite on a script, does that writer of that script get fired? And he said, no, absolutely not. If the structure is basically there and the story beats are laid out and the research is done on the crime, and all I have to do is rewrite dialogue, which is what most showrunners do, because the show needs a singular voice. And so, the showrunner almost always will do a polish on all the dialogue. But he said, no, that writer will not have failed at all. For him, that's part of the process, and he's totally fine with that. Whereas I've been on other shows where if you hand in a draft that needs to be completely rewritten, you can start cleaning out your office. So, I thought that was interesting.
Interesting. It is interesting. One more question. We'll let you go. In putting on your UCLA film professor hat, I'm just kind of wondering, what concepts about creating a great TV show, just generalizing there, but do your students have the most difficulty grasping? What is it that they struggle with?
Good questions, Bob. Because it's one of the things I always start off every class and every lecture I do on with the same sentence, and I say, write this down, and this is this is the biggest challenge that they face. And I tell them, write down, the end of your pilot episode is the beginning of your series. And so it's about keeping stories open-ended. So, and a lot of the challenge comes from UCLA is now really beefing up the television side of the program. When I went to school there, we only wrote movies, and there were no TV classes. And maybe you could study the history of television a little bit, but there weren't any writing classes for television writers. And so, most screenwriters are trained to write a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. But when you write a pilot, you need a beginning, a middle, and an end that stays open. It's a comma or an ellipsis, not a period. And so a lot of ideas are very finite, and you'll say, sounds like maybe there's one season there, or maybe it's a movie. And it's hard to, so I think it's harder to write a pilot and with a mini Bible for a show than it is to write a movie even though they're both extremely hard. because you have to keep everything open. You have to think, where is this going? What are the arcs? And how can this sustain for 5, 10 seasons? And that's the biggest challenge. And the way to keep it going is to find a franchise or what we call story engines, so that you can keep fueling the franchise so that it can keep going forward. Coming up with those story engines that are not trite and formulaic is really hard. Everybody can wrap their brain around the case of the week. It's a murder, it's a medical case, it's a legal case. But how do you how do you break the mold and come up with sort of new things and so not all shows are doctors, lawyers, and cops, and to have these strong story engines. That's challenging.
I would have never bet that Sherlock Holmes in New York was a long-term investment, but hey, things work out because they obviously had something planned out beyond the first hour. And other shows, we see that frequently. Excuse me. They have a great first hour. They launch that show with the pilot, and then it just goes nowhere because they just didn't. Clearly, they didn't think it out, or the creative people who started with the pilot are not there to take it forward, and you've just got a bunch. Pardon me, but a bunch of hacks trying to just put words in people's mouths and don't really have a sense of where it goes. And those series rarely survive.
Well, it has to really. The other challenge that a lot of the students have, and by the way, all these challenges that they have, I have. I mean, I'm not at the top of the mountain. The other challenge is they'll pitch something and I'll say, well, it's tepid, it's not hot, it's not, on fire, which you want your pilot to be. And they say, well, that stuff's coming. Like episode 6 is great, or that's going to be in season 2. And I'm always giving the same note. Take that great thing you want to put in season 2 and put it in the pilot. Start exciting, because they're never going to be a season 2 or an episode 6.
Episode 6, exactly.
So don't, and you don't. And the other challenge is, I say to them, you don't want your pilot to be all set up. It needs to be set up and a demonstration of what the show is going to be beyond just the setup. So, throw us into the deep end, trust that we'll be able to catch up, and, throw in a mystery and throw in a huge challenge, huge conflict, or at least the tip of the iceberg. But don't hold back, because, the pilot is going to be sort of the calling card and the key to opening up everything for the show. And, so I think that's also really important. It's something Shonda Rhimes really knows. Shonda Rhimes knows it's not enough just to have Olivia Pope as a fixer of, political scandals in D.C. She knows, if I don't also have Olivia's personal life a mess and her having an affair with the President of the United States, I'm going to start the show at sort of this, simmer instead of a boil. And I think that she's able to keep it boiling every week, which is what viewers really want.
I'm working on a pilot where I have an affair with the First Lady every week. So watch out for that, folks.
All right.
Speaking of which, folks, listen. You can find Neil Landau's book, The TV Showrunners Roadmap, in great bookstores everywhere, or you can order it right now at a great price right here at MrMedia.com. If you're watching on MrMedia.com, below the video, either on the left or on the right, you should see the cover of the book. You can click on it right now. Take it to Amazon. Neil, book's available as an ebook, I assume?
Yes, you can get it as a Kindle, and absolutely.
So you can download it immediately, or you can order it and they'll send you a physical copy. Maybe you can get it sent by drone within 30 minutes. Maybe you'll have to wait 2 days for the.
I have
post
one
office.
right here.
That's exactly what it looks like. And there's a website for the book, right, with some additional material.
Yeah, if you go to focalpress.com and you click on the link, there's a few extra interviews that are not in the book that we had to put online just to keep the book a certain length. So there's a few extras in there.
Cool. And do you do any social media yourself? Are you Twitter, Facebook?
Facebook. I'm on Twitter too, but I don't do it very often. I hate to admit it, but I don't fully understand Twitter. I'm waiting for one of my kids to explain it to me. I don't understand the hashtag thing, and I mean, it's embarrassing to say, but I am on Facebook, so people can find me.
Excellent. Well, Neil, it's a really interesting book. The interviews particularly. I like the breakdowns of the tips and help. It really helps even if you're not going to be a showrunner. You can start to understand what goes into the making of one of these shows, and maybe if you've ever thought about writing a pilot, you can use this as tips. But even if you're just a TV fan, reading the interviews with all these showrunners and how they explain what they were thinking, what went into the episodes that you've come to love, it's really fascinating. So thank you for the book. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Media, and thanks
Thank
for
you.
being here today.
All right. Good luck to you, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you.
Bye. I will have a very nice, beautiful office soon, but right now I'm in the laundry/utility area.
All right.
The preceding presentation was brought to you by the Realm Network.